Welcome to today's webinar, Design Thinking Techniques for Trainers, How to Create a Better Learner Experience. My name's Stephen Bowler. I'll be your moderator today. I do marketing and business development for Bottom Line Performance, the organization bringing this content to you today. I will be monitoring the questions as they come in. I'll be trying to route those to our presenters as they go. I'll also be sticking around at the end to make sure that everything gets buttoned up nicely before we close out. Our organization is called Bottom Line Performance, or BLP for short. We've been around for a long time, and we are a custom learning, design, and development company. We like to say that we design outcomes, not content, and how we get to those outcomes really starts with design, and more it's starting with design thinking and the incorporation of design thinking tools into the instructional design process. And we have some great speakers today who are going to tell you all about that. Before we get started, I wanted to briefly mention another opportunity to learn about design thinking coming up in just a couple of months. We are hosting our first ever conference on workplace learning called XLearn. It's all about creating excellent learner experiences. We're holding it on August 29th here in Indianapolis, Indiana. We've capped registration at 100 people, and we actually are already up to 86. So we only have 14 spots left as I'm saying this right now. So if you're interested or if you've been waiting to register, I encourage you to visit the link there. It's prominently featured on our website as well. So without further ado, I'm going to let our two presenters, Sharon Bowler and Laura Fletcher, introduce themselves. And we will start with Sharon.
Hi, everyone. As Steve said, my name is Sharon Bowler, and I'm the CEO of Bottom Line Performance. I am an instructional designer at heart and very passionate about the idea of design thinking. So I'm very excited to be here this afternoon or this morning or this evening, or depending on where you are, to kind of share our thoughts and our journey as we have started to incorporate more and more aspects of design thinking philosophy into how we work. And I'm joined today by Laura, and I'll let you introduce yourself, Laura.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is Laura Fletcher. I'm the manager of instructional design here at Bottom Line Performance. I've been using design thinking tools in design meetings with our clients and have really seen the benefits of creating more learner-focused solutions. So I just wanted to share some of those insights with you all today.
Terrific. Here's the journey that Laura and I plan to take you on this afternoon. We're going to start out by just explaining what design thinking even is and how it can be a means to creating a better learning experience. Then I'm going to focus on the learning journey that everyone goes on and the realization that that journey can either be magical or it can be miserable, and that we have the opportunity to try and consciously cultivate magical moments, and we have the opportunity to consciously avoid miserable moments in it. And then Laura's going to bring us home by talking about a couple of tools that we like to use to get to better design, empathy maps and personas as a means of trying to get into the minds and hearts of our learners. So without further ado, I want to know, we're told you what we want to do, but I'd like to know what brings you here today. And before you answer me, I want you to tell me some specific things. You can use the questions window to tell me what problems are you trying to solve and what obstacles are you trying to overcome? What's bringing you here to this place this afternoon, and why did you sign up for a design thinking webinar? What challenges are you seeing in your workplace? You can just go ahead and use the questions space to give me some of your ideas.
So I'm seeing folks who need to update their training. They're trying to reduce retraining, learner boredom, trying to be a more agile learning organization, just making things more engaging. It sounds like people want the learner to be more in focus and creating solutions that are more tailored to those individuals.
Terrific, terrific. And I am now seeing those now as well. So what If you did that, if it got better for you, what would be the outcomes? What would success look like for you? If you had more unified training and you were more efficient, if you were more consistent.
Productive meetings, better training solutions, more learner-centric training, more engaged learners.
Okay, and then how finally would you measure that? You know, what metrics would you use to gauge success? How would you know you arrived?
I see revenue, better results, change of
Yep,
behavior.
terrific. Oops. So this is the start of a blueprint, a strategy blueprint, and it's one of the tools that we are now using in our design workshops to get people thinking about where it is they want to end up. What challenges do they have and where do they want to end up in solving those challenges? And we think it's the first tool you should be using. It gets everyone on the same page regarding the problems as well as the goals of success. And it also can help you think about, well, of all the challenges that we have, how many of those can be resolved with a training solution and how many of those might really be resolved in another way? So when we did this for ourselves, as we thought about this journey we wanted to go on with design thinking, we identified several challenges. We felt like and are seeing that too often learners are absent from the design process. We don't know enough about them and their situations. It can be difficult to get our clients to define business outcomes. Sometimes the problem or opportunity has not been defined at all. Someone has just said we need training. Related to the absence of the learner from the design process is oftentimes it's subject matter experts who are driving the design rather than the learners. And the result can be too much content that goes into the solutions. We can also struggle to get buy-in on the idea that you need reinforcement and you need an implementation plan. You don't just need the design for the training. So if I look at this bigger, our aspirations are we want all of our designs, 100% of them, to consider all aspects of that learning journey and not just the learning event itself. We want 100% of our designs to be created with input from actual target learners. We want them all to have clearly defined business outcomes so we know what it is supposed to achieve. And we want our clients to have the ability to share tangible, measurable results with us because we designed a solution to achieve a specific result and they can pull data from that. And how we'll be able to measure that is the number of award-worthy projects we're creating. It doesn't mean we're going to submit them all for awards, but it means we could because they would have the results to justify doing that. We could also measure that by the volume of repeat and referral business that's been rooted in satisfaction with our processes and the outcomes we've received. So I'm trying to give you a taste for what a blueprint can do for you in terms of kind of setting a direction and getting you started in figuring out where you need to go. So the logical first question we have to ask if we want to put the learner in the design is how often are you getting input from learners as part of your training design process? We have a poll and we'll let you each answer that. Give you a second to do that. And then we'll show you actual feedback that we have received as part of our annual learning trends survey. We asked this question of 120 some respondents, and we'll see how your responses today compare with what they shared with us in our survey of a few months ago.
Give you another 5 seconds or so to respond here.
And this is, since nobody's going to know how you answered, this is a good place for honesty and not the right answer, but the real answer. Okay, so I can see that 9% say very often, 31 and 7 say rarely or never, and then there's a big chunk, 34%, that are in the middle that say sometimes, sometimes not. Okay, Steve, thank you. And I will show you how you compared with our survey. So you can see that you're not too dissimilar The sometimes, rarely, and never responses on our survey were 41%, and actually a greater percentage in the survey said very often, because I know you guys responded 9% very often. So what's the problem with that? The problem is that sometimes when you don't put the user in it at all, you're going to lose that learner, and you're not going to hit your outcome. The goal of design thinking is to find that sweet spot. We tend to make our decisions based on business viability and the technology we have without thinking about user desirability or user realities. So to avoid that, we can put the learner into the design process and adopt what we call that design thinking mentality. Design thinking starts with the user, or in our case, the learner, rather than including them as an afterthought. Hopefully most of you recognize this app. If you travel at all, you would. It's an Uber app. And who is the user of an Uber app? Anybody tell me? That's people who are frequent travelers, like me. I travel once or twice a month. I use Uber all the time. What problem does that app solve? It's made it a lot more convenient to find a ride to wherever you need to go at any time than it used to be when you had to have a taxi. I can recall times when I would be in a city and there weren't taxis waiting outside because it just wasn't that kind of place, and you had to find a phone number, call the taxi. Uber makes it really easy to get that ride, and it's been very transformative for business travelers. And that is because Uber has thought about the user experience. Great UX means I have a solution that is providing value to my user because it's solving a problem. It's super easy for them to use, and it's enjoyable to use. It's what gives them that 4-star rating in an app store, if you've ever seen that. Uber solves my travel problem. It's super easy to download and use. I can even pay right in the app. I don't have to fumble with cash. I can see who my driver is. I can see exactly where my car is and how soon it's going to arrive. And it's actually kind of fun to use it and watch the driver traversing the map getting toward me. So you can only get to a good user experience like that if the user is part of the design. If you have great clarity in what problem you're solving for that user, and if your user shares that definition that this is a problem for me and this is the right solution for me. So when we take the learner out of the design, we have no idea whether what we're designing is actually going to solve anything for them or not. This is a design thinking model, and you'll notice that the very first step in this model is empathize. That's the starting point for design thinking, is to get to know your learner or your user, understanding their thoughts and their feelings, their daily reality, their workflow, their pain points, their challenges. When we do that, then we can define the problem and loop back. And from there, we can start brainstorming or ideating on the most appropriate and beneficial solutions for that learner that we now have an empathic view for. We can prototype real quick and dirty solutions and then get feedback from that learner on how valuable that solution is, how enjoyable that solution is, and how easy that solution is to use. And then finally roll out to implementation after we've kind of iterated a few times to make sure we have it right. So that the whole point of this is to bring the learner into the process. And Laura and I are going to walk you through a few tools that you can use to do that. The first tool we're going to walk you through is the journey and experience map. What is the learning journey, and why does it matter that you think about it as a journey? Then we're going to talk about empathy maps and show them to you, give you a chance to actually do a little creation yourself. And we're going to talk about how empathy maps drive the creation of personas, and personas then help you think through what the journey should be like and what you should avoid as well. So let's start out by talking about the learning journey. And learning is a journey. It's not an event. That journey starts well before people go into a workshop. And if there is nothing that follows a workshop or an e-learning course, the journey ends before you have ever actually seen results from it. So here is the journey map that we're working on. This is iterating with us internally, but it is something we're sharing with clients and that we're using to kind of guide our design discussions. It starts with these steps and understanding that to learn anything, whether it's cooking or safety procedures or how to sell, there's a journey. And that journey begins with preparation and the notice and commit steps. It goes to acquiring knowledge and skill, moves from there to building memory and trying to use it on the job. And it doesn't end until you can maintain use over time and sustain it over the long term. There's the learner perspective on that journey, which is what we too often leave out of it. There are actions that are occurring for that learner at every step of that journey. There are feelings they have. There are outcomes that would be optimal outcomes. There can be magical moments that drive that learner forward. There can be miserable moments that make them want to disengage or stop the journey. There's also an organizational perspective. And when you think about that Venn diagram that I showed you and the three attributes that together make up design thinking, this is where business viability often comes in. There's things that the department is going to do to support each step of that journey or not, if you fail to consider the full journey. And there are business tensions or contradictions that can sometimes make it hard to execute optimally in each step of that journey. Conversely, there's also opportunities that the organization can leverage when they know their learner, when they really have an empathic view of the learner and understand what that learner's pain points are. So let's take a look at each step. But first, I want to point out that here's where we tend to focus. We put a lot of time, attention, and energy on this learn and practice thing, the actual event, and we put very little to no attention on the steps that happen before and the steps that need to happen afterward. So let's take this one at a time and kind of talk through it in a little bit more detail. So to prepare to learn, I first have to notice that there is a need to learn something. I may have that internal recognition where Laura and I recognized that we wanted to dive far deeper into design thinking because we were encountering these challenges repeatedly and we needed different tools to help us. Or it can be something that's more external, where the organization says to you, you need to learn this. We're going to be implementing this change. You need to learn. I can feel intrigued or I can feel dismayed. So I can have positive feelings or I can have negative feelings. The desired outcome would be that I have an acceptance of that need to learn. Once I've noticed, only then can I actually commit and say, yes, I'm willing to learn this. Optimally, the feelings that would be generated are those of motivation. The worst case scenario would be that I'm actively resistant or resentful of having to make this commitment. The desired outcome is that I'm willing to make time to learn. As you think about that, small things can make notice magical or it can make it miserable. So here's an example of a customer long ago who did a really great job of making that notice stage more magical. They made it into a game and they challenged people and they had constant information going on as people were going on this journey or starting this journey. They featured people who were starting to do things, did profiles, etc., had a leaderboard, anything they could do to get people to notice this, and it was really effective. In this context, this was part of a product launch, and there was an entire theme around the whole experience of the learning, and it started from the very first notification to the learner that something was out there, and it took a totally different, non-traditional approach. Formulating more of a communications campaign to engage learners in the experience and to get them into the story from the beginning to try and make it seem like something other than a drudgery experience. Here's yet another one that kind of maintained a weekly communication to keep people noticing, to kind of issue that challenge to them, get them involved. So once we've noticed and committed, then we can move to actually learning and practicing. Optimally, as we're going through that stage or step in the journey, we would feel curious and we would become immersed. The worst case scenario is to become bored or overwhelmed or disinterested. The desired outcome from the organization's perspective is that they're going to find relevance and they're going to gain belief and value. And that is certainly what the learner wants too, because you don't want to commit time to something that is delivering no value to you. That's the definition of frustration. So if you think about making the learning and practicing magical, that can be done in creative ways too, even with e-learning. So in this case, we show the example of getting the introductory email inviting you to the whole experience. And then when you go to do the first component of that, which is an e-learning component, you enter into a really fun story that kind of harkens back to Star Wars. The whole thing is extremely well done and a delight to do. I actually, when I took this course, laughed out loud in several places because I found attributes of it so delightful to experience, which is very different than the way a lot of e-learning can come across. So I've given you a couple of examples. I'd like to hear from you. What else makes a learning journey magical? If you can think of anything you've learned, whether it's a workplace experience or something else, what makes that magical?
Humor.
Steve,
Yeah. I see humor, relevance, stories. If I can apply it to my personal life or goals, hands-on. Good example.
Perfect. You hit many of the same ones that we would hit. It has to be really relevant to me, and I have to see that immediately. I have to have adequate time to do it. That is oftentimes one of the biggest pain points for learners, is that they're asked to learn in a very compressed time frame and they don't have enough time to do it. Interaction with others can often add some of the magic to that journey. The social connections that we can make and the opportunity to learn from others. Simply having well-designed materials, that goes to the usability of the experience. Is it easy for me to understand how to use it? Is it easy for me to find things? Is the functionality? Are my directions clear? All of those things contribute to a magical experience. But now let's talk about miserable. If I think about what can make learning miserable, one of the things that comes to mind immediately for me is on the e-learning side, many customers have a desire to lock screens down so that you can't move forward in the course until you have clicked everything on a screen. And I bet you some of you may have the same experience. This is a delightful story. I included the web link for you so you can go check it out yourself. And I've given you the start of the story on here. Eric sat down to do his training. Across from him was Lucy from the training team. After exchanging pleasantries, Lucy handed Eric a single page with text on it. "Let's start your training session," she said enthusiastically. Eric looks at the page and says, "Is this it?" "Oh no, there's more, 41 pages more, but you don't get the next page until you've read that one." Eric stares. "You're kidding, right?" "Oh no, I'm serious. You'll get the next page when you've finished reading that one. Just say next when you're finished." "Well, why can't I have all the pages?" Lucy looks alarmed. "This is really important stuff. You might jump to the last page and say you've read it all without actually reading it." "So you don't trust me?" "Of course I trust you. It's just that some people would do that if we gave them a chance." "So you don't trust anyone?" Lucy stared at Eric. "Just read the damn page." Eric looked down at the page and after a few seconds said next. That is the definition of a miserable experience. What else makes a journey miserable for a learner?
So death by PowerPoint,
Yep.
lecture, reading from a slideshow, monotone voice, irrelevant info, boring content, unexplained lingo. We've got a lot here. People are given more miserable than magical.
Well, and that's, yeah.
Talking heads, no images, no interaction, militant training, forcing people to review info they already know. I could keep going here. I'll hand
Yeah.
it back over to you.
You guys have got it. You've nailed it. So you know that that's true. And those are kind of the universals. But then there are also things that can be very specific to your target learner, which Laura will get into as she talks about the empathy map. So I've shared some of the ones that I figured you would point out. The one that I want to say is most important, where empathy maps really help, is that failure to connect to the person's job or learner's workflow. Too often, when the learner's absent from the design, the SME doesn't know the actual workflow. They may be an expert on a product, but they really don't know, for example, how a sales rep's call goes. They don't know how much time a sales rep has, and so they'll spend an hour talking about messaging for a sales rep that's actually going to have 30 seconds to 2 minutes to deliver that message to a healthcare provider. So there's a complete disconnect between what we're saying we need people to learn and what they can actually do on their job. So then we have to go from learning and practice to building the memory and trying and using it on the job. And that's where these next two steps come in. Here we have to repeat and elaborate. People have to have spaced repetitions in order to really learn something. Once is not enough. And that practice should really get more elaborative. Starts out simple and we add more complexity over time. And then if we do a good job of that, we'll have people feeling committed and gaining confidence, and then they'll deepen down as they start using it in their work. They'll increase their confidence and they'll decide to go deeper. How can I build more expertise in this area? How can I share my success with others? And here I've added tensions or contradictions that can sometimes come into play, because why don't these steps happen in the work world? I think a lot of L&D people are aware that the event is not going to get an organization where it needs to go. There has to be ample reinforcement, practice, and building, skill building after an event, but yet we don't do it. What comes into play? Yeah, a lot of times people will say they don't have time, they don't have budget. The question I would ask is, if you do a good job of defining the outcomes that people need to hit and the operational results that people need to produce, you're more likely to be able to make a strong case for making the investment so that you can get that return on it. So here's a few ideas for how you can go beyond that event. These are just things that we've incorporated with success or are experimenting with now. The first is to try and go away from the LMS entirely, or else just link to it, and build apps that blend the learning, the extension of that learning, and the just-in-time needs all together. So you can see there's a lesson list in here. There's also resources, and there's searchability of content. The engage piece in this on the right enables people to go deeper and find more content if they need to. Another solution you can try is to consider starting to use chatbots. You can make a chatbot available through texting, and we've given you a fun little thing you can try after the session today to see and experience a chatbot yourself. You can also consider adding a chatbot to a website. So if there's a website that's part of your target learner's workflow, such as a sales rep would probably use Salesforce a lot, you can add a chatbot right there to give people just-in-time support. If you want to enable practice and everybody's virtual and remote, you can consider adding video practice tools. Tool that we are familiar with and have seen are Rehearsal or Allego. They are very similar to one another and do the same thing, but the cool thing about them is that on average, people will practice 3 times before they finally upload a video for someone to look at, meaning they're getting lots of repetition. You can use adaptive tools. Knowledge Guru Drive is one of those tools, and it gives great analytics for managers to see where people have confidence and competence, or lack of confidence or lack of competence, and provide coaching, and it'll tailor the content that a learner receives based on how they're performing. So maintaining use over time is really not L&D's responsibility, it's the organization's responsibility. That's where your systems and your processes all need to align, your incentives need to align, things have to be in place to enable that performance over time. You can design great training, you can teach great skills, but then if you don't reward people for the use of those skills, they're not going to use them. And that's an example of where the organization needs to have a role in maintaining that use over time. So I'm going to flip it over to Laura and let you kind of talk about empathy mapping and personas.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. So the two tools that Sharon demonstrated, both the strategy blueprint and the learner journey, can really be used kind of at the beginning and end of a project to plot out both where you want to go, and then once you have a design in place, to map it out and think about where there are any gaps or holes in what you're presenting. The reason I wanted to talk about empathy maps and personas is because these really focus right in that first step of this process, the empathize step, where I feel like we have a great opportunity to improve and do more for our learners than we currently are. I really liked this Peter Drucker quote, especially if you change the word customer to learner. I think learners are rarely buying what we think we're selling them. The learner may not be using a solution the way you intended for him to use it. He may not be using it at all. And our job really should be to create what the learner needs and wants. And one way that we can do that, there we go, is to truly find that sweet spot that Sharon was talking about, that balance between desirability, viability, feasibility. And if you look at the other Drucker quote here, the only way that we can answer that question about what the learner values, what they need and want, we have to go directly to the source, to the learners themselves, to uncover this information. Discovering those needs and wants and how to maximize the magical and minimize the miserable really starts with understanding your learners. And a great place to start doing that is by building an empathy map. This is a way to help visualize your learners' realities and build empathy for it. That is the purpose of creating an empathy map, is to really walk a day in these people's shoes, to understand what's going on for them, where they're at. You cannot create a map for somebody that you don't understand. So again, you've really got to pull in perspective directly from your target learner. So let's try an example here. Let's say I'm going to buy you an outfit, and I know how old you are, and I even know what size you bought the last time you went shopping. But I'm going to guess that there's a little more you'd like me to know before I walk into the mall. So let me give you a few question prompts. Use the question function to type in responses. You don't have to respond to everything, but if something resonates you that you think that I should know about you in order to be successful buying you an outfit, go ahead and type that in for me. So we'll start with your thoughts and feelings. Tell me a little bit about how you feel about clothing in general, and what you maybe think about when you're shopping for your own clothes, if you were going to go out and buy this outfit. So what colors you like. It's hard to find things that fit. Amen. Oh, it's painful. Ouch. These are pain points. Style and comfort are important. That's right. Yeah, go ahead and keep telling me how you think and feel about clothing. I'm going to present some additional prompts for you here. Tell me a little bit about what you see during the day. What's your environment like? What types of activities are you doing while you're going to wear these clothes? Where are you while you're wearing these clothes? Okay, so some people are at an office and they're in a really professional space. Other people work at home. Some people are outside. A working mom needs practical, simple, that still looks good. Yes. On campus, so out in the elements, so it needs to hold up to the weather. Excellent. Yeah, keep telling me, keep responding to the prompts. I'm going to give you a few more. Tell me a little bit about who are your influences on your clothing choices. Is that your spouse? Is that your manager? And what messages you get about your clothes now? Do people think you're very fashion forward? Do people tell you you really need to up your game? And then how do you portray yourself to others? What do you say and do that communicates your personal brand? And tell me about the last comment that you made about someone else's clothes. What really stands out to you about other people's outfits? Okay, so a lot about color. Color is important to people. Okay, so a lot about fit. Fit is very personalized. That's great. And then I've got two last questions to help me really buy the best outfit I possibly can for you. Tell me about your challenges when you go shopping. What are some of your pain points? You've already done a great job identifying some of those. But tell me about what's challenging about buying clothes for yourself right now, as well as what are your goals? So if you walked out of the store with the perfect outfit, what's the criteria that you would say, that's it, that's the one? Okay, so a lot comes down to fit, price. Now we're getting into the price considerations. A sale at any cost. I love it. Excellent. Okay, so clearly there's a lot of things that I need to know to help me get closer to buying you an outfit that you'd actually be happy with. And you can see how all of this information would really inform that decision. I feel like I could get pretty close. That fit is always a X factor, but I could get a lot closer now than I could when we started, just based on your size that you bought last time and how old you are. So this is a empathy map that I had put together based on my answers to some of these questions. You can see some of this is a little gender specific. Some of this may be different from some of your answers. There's some things that I definitely saw parallels for me, that I've got some problem areas. My work clothes have to survive 2 kids at home because I don't have a costume change when I get back there. So there's things that we could definitely draw some commonalities. So if, for instance, we wanted to design an outfit that several of us would be happy wearing, you can see how this tool would start to uncover some of those commonalities, so we can find that common ground and get as close to a design that we would all be happy with as possible. So let's look also at an example where we're designing for a group. So taking this into the training space, let's imagine that you're designing onboarding for newly hired administrative staff. I'm just going to ask you a couple of the questions that I did previously. And again, go ahead and use the question function. Tell me about your thoughts and concerns. As a newly hired admin, what are you thinking? Thoughts and concerns starting this new role? What will a typical day in your new role consist of? What motivates you to get up and start it on this job every day? Will my boss like me? Will I know the technology? Will I be successful? What are my responsibilities? A lot of similar ideas. And I'm actually going to stop you right there as we get these responses in, because the fact is, if you haven't done the admin role at the organization that you're designing for, you probably can't answer these questions to the depth of what we're looking for. I look back at the responses that you gave about the outfit question, and it's very specific. And if you are not gathering insights from the people directly, at best, you're going to have assumptions that are too few or too generic to be useful for your purposes. And at worst, they're going to be wrong, which takes you in a completely different direction. So you can see some of the conclusions we can draw from these two examples right off the bat is that, number one, you want to define or think about how you define the group that you're going to design for to get data that's meaningful to the design. You can't design for one specific person, one spot in time. You want to kind of aim for that archetype of your learner. And I'll say this several times throughout the webinar today, you have to involve your actual target audience members in creating this empathy map. So one of the first questions that you'll run into, if you aren't thinking about this already, is, well, Laura, I'm designing training for all of my employees. That's close to 30,000 people. How can I possibly create an empathy map for that audience? And to answer that question, you really have to ask yourself, what characteristics are going to impact what and how the training is delivered? It gets back to that defining your learner and who you're actually mapping in the empathy map. So it might be best to create more than one empathy map, but I would recommend trying to keep it to that minimum essential category breakdown. So for example, let's say that you are creating all employee training for a process that everybody's going to be doing for the first time. You might be able to get away with actually doing an empathy map because all of your learners are starting something new for the first time that none of them have done before. It might come down to differentiation between new and experienced employees. Maybe it's regional. We see a lot of US versus global breakdowns, or the functional role, whether they're an individual contributor or a manager or in different functions. Okay, so that's what you want to think about when you're defining the audience that you're going to be designing for. Now, this is an empathy map that we created with a client in a design meeting, and I created it with them just the same way that we did when we walked through the outfit example. Gave them question prompts, they created all of the post-it notes, and we started to group some like themes together. So that's kind of what it looks like in process. It's messy, it's exciting. But as you think about implementing a tool like this in your own organization, what challenges or limitations do you foresee coming up as you start to try using this tool? Go ahead and type into the question function. Okay, so ideas that are too vague. Absolutely, and that's another reason that you want to make sure that the right people are in the room so they can ask to the or respond to the right level of detail. Buy-in from leadership. That really speaks to that business viability part of the Venn diagram for sure. Facilitating participation, and frankly, I think people always are eager to jump in and tell you what they want you to know. Just like you want me to know what fits you well, what your favorite colors are. People are often very excited to participate in doing this. Okay, so I will say, again, this is very dependent on who's in the room. You want to make sure that you have representatives of the target audience completing this activity, and give them a little bit of situational context. So for example, if you are starting that new process, for example, pitch your empathy map as someone who's about to start our performance management process for the first time. Give them that situational context to respond to the questions. Now, after you create your map, you're going to want to fill in the blanks a little bit to really start to paint a picture of a relatable person. And a learner persona is a great way to do that. It goes beyond just the demographic profile information to really tell this person's story. So while you'll want to get a name, an age, some background and experience, you'll also want to gather some additional information, things like, what are their realities in a typical day? If they can describe a day in their life, that's always really helpful. Or their workflow, their sales call flow. What are their device realities? Do they have access to the devices that you're thinking about designing for? Do they use them? And what's the use case for how they're going to access and use the training you're designing? Then if you can add a photo or a key quote, that really helps to breathe life into that persona. So the persona becomes this holistic picture of all of your audience analysis information. And while the goal isn't around how long it is, the more types of data you can gather about the learner's needs and goals and use cases, the more powerful that persona becomes throughout the lifespan of the project, beyond design and into development. Now, some of this information, like the use case or the context, can be extracted from your empathy map that you've created, but some of it requires a little further conversation. So let's look at an example of what this can look like. So here's part of an empathy map that we generated for a pharmaceutical sales rep. We sat down and asked the rep similar questions to the ones that I asked you. And I've highlighted a few of the key statements that we carried forward into the persona and into the design. So that's things like concerns about very limited call time, the need for practice time and reinforcement. So, okay, I got the messaging and the training, I know the product info, but I need time to be comfortable with that. And then the ultimate goal of having physicians write more prescriptions and ultimately lead to higher sales commission. So then the resulting persona that we created, this is Tina. You can see the connection to that empathy map information. So first of all, this idea of building confidence, that's a challenge that we listed in her persona. How to actually apply information into the sales call. You can see under her picture, the sales call realities. We discovered that she may only have 30 seconds of face-to-face time with a physician. She waits in the hall until they're between appointments, and then she's got 30 seconds to apply and tailor what you told her in training to the actual context. On the other hand, if she's got a larger event, she may get 15 minutes of time. So we need to think about how we're going to apply the information to those different contexts. And then finally, you can see how this idea of her goals, her motivators, work both into her personal profile as well as into her values down at the bottom. There's some additional information that we collected from her. So you'll notice her personal profile has some fictional details about her age and her family. That might be not true. This may not be a real person, but it really helps to humanize your persona. We also asked about a typical day. Over on the right-hand side, you'll see a day in the life and some of the technological realities that she has, and the fact that she's very tablet-centric. Okay, so that's an important consideration. As you look at a design like this, it's almost like mining for design gold. These attributes can really apply quickly to what you're designing, and you can also integrate them back into the learning journey. So as we look at what Tina's learning journey could look like, I've pulled those three same themes that I pointed out in the previous two tools. And so you can see here, we plan to begin the process using persuasive messaging to get her fired up about her goal of winning more prescriptions from physicians. Based on her need to apply new information to the sales call, we've built some video demos for different sales call scenarios so she can see how that messaging, see someone else tailor that messaging for each setting. And then to help her build confidence, the design includes one of those video tools that Sharon shared, so she can upload videos of practice presentations and solicit feedback from her manager, as well as some podcasts to take advantage of the amount of drive time she has. Let's use that to our advantage as part of her learning journey. So you can see how we're applying the audience analysis information from the empathy map and the persona directly into the learning journey. And this may not accommodate every single learner preference, but consider the frequent alternative. I think Sharon mentioned we often focus on the learning event and not the journey. The alternative could be a simple 30-minute e-learning course on a PC, which now that you know so much about Tina, you realize that really doesn't suit her use case for this information. Wanted to share this other persona with you just to give you a contrast. This is a much simpler persona, but what I wanted to point out about this is as you look at this is Linda. She's getting started in a job in a very complex and highly regulated industry. So she's very overwhelmed, which you can even see from her photo. But what this tells me, what I can glean from even this handful of bullet points, is that we need to provide just-in-time resources whenever it's possible. We need to help her use the resources she has. You see that last bullet that says, even if she can find a resource, she may not be able to apply the contents. They're very much written in legalese or operating operations protocols that don't directly apply to the scenarios that she needs them for. So I need to help her use those better. And I'll also say this is a non-training consideration, but up at the top there where you see she has no prior knowledge of this industry, that point can be very helpful to a subject matter expert that I'm collecting content from. So if I can give them that context of who we're designing for, they can start to self-select what information is going to be most useful for that. So as Sharon was talking about this sweet spot, empathy maps and personas can really help us to find that balance. We often have a lot of information about what's viable for the business and what technologically makes sense or is available, but I feel like we do not always do a great job of collecting that top circle, that user information. So here are some ways that we can start to balance that out. With all of the information you collect from an empathy map and a persona, you can ensure that you've got the right topics written at the right level based on their education and experience, that they're delivered using the best format or medium. Like Tina, she's 90% of the time on her tablet. If we give her a course for a PC, she's probably going to be doing that in an evening or a weekend, and that's a miserable moment for her. So we can uncover those kinds of things. When it comes to the balancing business viability, we start to hear some of the non-training factors from people, like the fact that their resources are written in legalese and they don't understand them, or that other job conditions are very poor, they don't have the resources they need. That can also help to identify how we can map that journey and include those reinforcement or sustainability activities. And from a technology side, what technology is even available? What human resources are available? Do you have the right subject matter experts to get the learner what they need? Do those things match up? And what kind of timeline are you working with? Is it even possible to create something that the learner is asking for in the time that you have? So you can really see, I'm sure we could go even deeper into how these different pulls and pushes kind of balance each other out as you design training. Just a couple quick last thoughts. You guys know how much can change between design and final deliverable. So a couple of best practices for keeping that persona alive throughout the process. I suggest having somebody on your team assume the persona's identity at the design meeting. Give them an advocate and a voice in that creation of the solutions. Maybe have the development team start to have some shared ownership of that persona. Have them choose the photo for the persona because they're the ones going to be making decisions day to day as you create the solution you designed. Consider creating a persona wall. Have all of the personas and photos for your current learners in current projects, put those all in one place. And as I mentioned, include that persona for your subject matter experts. We include Linda's persona on the first slide of every content deck for our subject matter experts, so they have that context up front. And of course, include them in the review cycles to make sure that you're vetting and continually revalidating what you've created. There is very low risk, I will say, in using these tools. You can't create an empathy map and then break something. And so my recommendation would just be to dive in, get started, see what works for you. Remember to keep that sweet spot in mind and always be designing for the journey, not just that single learning event. You can use the learning journey to map out your design and identify any holes. On that note, though, do just enough to get the results that you're looking for. Don't make the journey any more complicated than it needs to be. Keep your actual target audience involved in the process. Don't assume that what you've created in the design is going to hold water as you develop it. And again, always make sure you're going back to prototype and test elements of the design to vet out any assumptions that you've made through the process. So Sharon, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Laura and I focused a lot on just the empathizing and defining steps of this process, although we also tried to give you some ideation ideas to show you how you can kind of brainstorm and idea solutions once you have that understanding and empathy for your learner. And there are more techniques to learn and to share. Prototyping and testing are two more that we're really eager to have an opportunity to talk to you about. So you can look forward to a future webinar where we focus on those latter parts of design thinking and actually go into implementation as well. In addition, you can monitor our blogs. We are writing all the time and we're publishing a lot on design thinking. We'll have a workshop at our XLearn conference in August, and there'll just be more to come. Several people have asked via the questions if we're going to have the journey map available and the slides available, and I can tell you that we will following this webinar. So you'll be able to download those as well. I know we're at the top of the hour, so Steve, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to kind of wrap up.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Laura and Sharon, for sharing all of this great knowledge and information with us. I see that some questions have been rolling in as Laura was going and Sharon was jumping in and answering some of those. Wanted to put everyone's mind at ease and share that the recording will be available after the webinar as well. We take some time to clip out some of those pauses that happen in a live webinar and all of that stuff and send you a cleaned up version. So you can expect an email with that sometime tomorrow. And yes, also the slides and the journey map will be available. I can take a few more questions if anyone else wants to type them in. Otherwise, I'm going to leave the slide up. Sharon and Laura's contact information is up there. Our website is up there. And we hope that you'll continue to follow along with Bottom Line Performance as we continue to publish quality content and share what we're learning and what we're doing in our work, helping organizations create better training.